Trump's director of national security has said that Pakistan poses a threat to U.S. interests. This statement is part of a worldwide threat assessment report by H.R. McMaster. Here's the statement in full, and I'm quoting from the report now. Quote, Pakistan will continue to threaten U.S. interests by deploying new nuclear weapon capabilities, maintaining its ties to militants, restricting counter-terrorism cooperation, and drawing closer to China, end quote. The report also goes on to say that terrorist groups supported by Islamabad will continue to take advantage of their safe haven to plan and conduct attacks against India and Afghanistan, which could hurt American interests. WION's associate editor, Palki Sharma Upadhyay, joining me live on the broadcast for more on that story. Palki, a tough stance by the United States and from no one less than the NSA. This obviously is going to work in India's favor.
It is, but when one looks at American policies and the statements, there is always a bit of a dichotomy there, because on the one hand they're talking about the threat perception from Pakistan and how it's going to continue to grow, and the nuclear installations and the terror factory and so on and so forth. On the other, we have a budget proposal from Donald Trump, no less, which says, which proposes $336 million in defense aid to Pakistan. So how can these two go together is a question that needs to be asked. But in terms of positioning, yes, it helps India. And this report, let me take it further from where you left, mentions India specifically and its relation to Pakistan. It says, and I'm quoting, Pakistan's perception of its eroding position relative to India, reinforced by endemic economic weakness and domestic security issues, almost certainly will exacerbate long-held fears of isolation and drive Islamabad's pursuit of actions that run counter to U.S. goals for the region. Of course, all of this is coming from American point of view. They're looking at Afghanistan, they're looking at their strategy in South Asia, and they're looking at Pakistan's utility in this game going forward. They see India as a more reliable partner to further their strategic and security interests in the region. But having said that, they cannot abandon Pakistan completely. So while there is an understanding that Pakistan poses a threat, that Pakistan is turning more into a liability than an asset in the region, Pakistan is only the only supply route that they have. The U.S. military has going into Afghanistan. They will have to look for alternatives. The other alternative is Iran, a country that America doesn't talk to. So it's a tough balancing act for the U.S. at this point. Absolutely.
Stay with me, Palki. Strategic expert Jaidev Ranade also joining me on the phone line right now on that story. Mr. Ranade, the U.S. has seen an uptick in the rhetoric against Pakistan, but as my colleague Palki was pointing out, it doesn't always follow up in terms of real action against Pakistan. What do you make of this latest statement by the National Security Advisor that says Pakistan poses a threat to U.S. interests?
Well, I think what Palki said is absolutely correct. There is a dichotomy in the U.S. policy and U.S. utterances about Pakistan since Trump came in. But having said that, let me also say that one point on which Trump seems to have not wavered so far is his view on rooting out terrorism. And there he seems to have identified Pakistan as the source of terror, and he has been applying steady pressure on Pakistan. But much more needs to be done. And I think here the U.S. needs to re-examine and re-evaluate its own policies, whether they do not need to be tougher on Pakistan in order to make it comply. I think this policy of making strong noises and then softening it by giving cash infusions is not really something that's going to work in the long term with Pakistan, which knows how to really play the Americans. And that's what we are seeing at work even again.
Right. And the report, does mention also concern about Pakistan drawing closer to China. Do you think that's an important factor to note as well?
It's a factor in the sense that Pakistan is trying to balance one against the other. And certainly they've grown very close to China. Since the last almost 8 to 9 years, there are more Pakistan army officers today training in China than in the United States. So I think that is a factor that needs to be reckoned. The second thing is the amount of money that China is pumping into Pakistan and the projects that they are undertaking under the CPEC. While actual cash hasn't yet come in and jobs for Pakistanis haven't happened, but the promise of something in future is still there, and the Pakistanis are holding on to it, particularly the Pakistan army. I think they have a common agenda in Afghanistan also. So Pakistan is trying to play one off against the other, and they're banking on the fact that their geographical location is something that the Americans would need in their campaign or their presence in Afghanistan. So that's what is going on. But I think the Americans do need to see the picture over the longer term. And with the rise of radicalism, radical Islam in Pakistan, Pakistani society getting more radicalized, I think it's a long-term threat. And long-term doesn't mean more than about 5 years. That's something that the Americans really have to look at.
Fair enough. Palki, interestingly also and poignantly perhaps for India, the mention of terror safe havens in Pakistan coming at a time when India just had to deal with 3 strikes within a period of a few days in Jammu and Kashmir, all of them orchestrated by terrorists from Pakistan-based installations. So I suppose India's defense minister's statement about how Pakistan is behind these terror attacks, gaining some sort of echo perhaps in the statement from the United States.
Oh, absolutely. The United States has always backed India's concerns when it talks about terror safe havens in Pakistan, about the military establishment in Pakistan, the ISI supporting terrorists, aiding and abetting them, training them and helping them infiltrate into India through ceasefire violations and giving cover. What frustrates India is the fact that the United States is tends to pick and choose as to which terrorist organization it has to focus on. They're focusing on the Haqqanis because the Haqqanis threaten their assets, threaten their bases in Afghanistan, and that is the bigger devil for the Americans. The sense is that India has to deal with its own enemies, and while there are measures to rein in, while there are measures to declare certain terrorists and their organizations as global terrorists and sanctions are imposed, very little is done, according to India, to build the real pressure on Pakistan to act against these. And then again, the question is, who is calling the shots in Pakistan? Can the civilian government, how much can the civilian government do? How much can the military do? And at a time when we are talking about someone like Hafiz Saeed entering mainstream politics, it's all very complex as far as targeting terror groups in Pakistan is concerned, because they're looking at mainstreaming. But yes, in terms of timing, it is going to be welcome from India's point of view that in a span of 24 hours, first the Pentagon report, which talks about the Chinese threat, and also mentions India and the Indian Ocean region, and now the Pakistani threat. So yes, it vindicates India's position, to say the least.
Absolutely. Palki, stay with me a second longer. For our viewers who are just joining in, just a quick update on the story we're tracking right now. This is breaking news coming in this hour. The US President Donald Trump's Director of National Security has said that Pakistan poses a threat to US interests. This statement is part of a worldwide threat assessment report by H.R. McMaster. The statement says, and I'm quoting here, Pakistan will continue to threaten U.S. interests by deploying new nuclear weapons capabilities, maintaining its ties to militants, restricting counter-terrorism cooperation, and drawing closer to China, end quote. The report also goes on to say that terrorist groups supported by Islamabad will continue to take advantage of their safe haven to plan and conduct attacks against India and Afghanistan, which could hurt American interests. I suppose, Mr. Ranade, the operative part of this is clearly the underlying factor, that is American interests, and how perhaps those might get hurt.
Certainly, American interests will be hurt with the rise of radicalization of Pakistani society. American interests will be hurt. The Islamists in Pakistan will get more emboldened. We're already seeing, as you mentioned just now, Hafiz Saeed taking to mainstream politics. And where I might disagree somewhat with the broad analysis that you painted was the doubt that you expressed about the army backing the extremists. I think they are backing it, but what is happening is that the Islamist elements are becoming stronger, quicker than what the army anticipated, and therefore there is a pressure now what we are seeing on the army. So in course of time, that will become even more tense, that relationship between the Islamist jihadi groups and the army. But at the moment, I think they are still working together. They're getting a lot of funding and support from the armed forces in Pakistan. And I think that is something we should not be discounting at all.
Fair enough. Your point's well taken. Jaidev Ranade, thank you very much.